You're trying to give the young people something that will help them, yet you don't know exactly what it ought to be.
Welcome to the Teach Thought Podcast. Terry, introduce yourself.
My name is Terry Ike. I'm a former classroom teacher and now director at Teach Thought, which means I do a lot of different things very badly.
And I'm Drew Perkins. I'm the Director of Professional Development here at Teach Thought, and hopefully that means I do a lot of different things really well.
And together we're hosting a podcast, which hopefully makes Teach Thought more accessible to you in more places, right, Drew?
Well, hopefully, yeah, but mostly it's just me hosting it because you just add episodes every so often, right?
Well, you know, I've got things to do. Remember, I'm director.
That's true. Thanks for tuning into the podcast once again. We're happy to have you here. In today's episode, I had the pleasure to speak with a teacher that I had worked with in a PBL workshop last summer, and I had written a blog about around their PBL work to tackle world hunger. Her name is Nan Arant. She teaches at Calvert City Elementary in Western Kentucky, Marshall County, Kentucky. And we talked about her teaching history, the work that we did together in the PBL workshop last summer, and that experience, as well as the work that she's done with her students, specifically around the World Hunger Project and the challenges and rewards for both her as a teacher and her students. And just as a reminder, if you're interested in project-based learning work or workshops, we do offer those, of course, as well as many other services such as inquiry, differentiation, growth mindset, lots of other things in our workshop menu. And you can find all of that by going to teachthought.com/PD, where we can craft a personalized professional growth plan for you. And if you're an individual, don't forget about our virtual coaching options. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome to the podcast. We have Nan Arant from Calvert City Elementary in Western Kentucky in Marshall County Schools. And she's here to talk about some of her experiences with project-based learning and the work that she has done with her students, especially as it relates to one of the blog posts that we did. So Nan, go ahead and introduce yourself and give the listeners a little bit of background on your teaching career and kind of where you are in that respect.
Okay, well, I've been teaching for 21 years, and I have taught every grade from kindergarten through fifth grade. I've been teaching fourth grade for about 15 years. And this year I am doing a split grade. I'm doing fourth and fifth grade, but I'm teaching all science. And I have really enjoyed it because I have had students 2 years in a row. So that has been really beneficial for doing the project-based learning because I already had a background on my students and knew what they could do. So that has really helped. And that's about me in a nutshell as far as my teaching. I have been at the same school for the last 16 years.
Okay.
So pretty set where I am and enjoy it.
Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about, because Nan was part of a PBL workshop that I facilitated, and I love that I got a chance to see some of the work after the workshop, because lots of times I've done workshops with teachers and unfortunately the school doesn't do a whole lot of follow-up or sustained work, continued growth visits and things like that. So sometimes I see the beginnings of projects and don't always see the ends or the results of the project. So it was really great for me to get some pictures and some things that were evidence, and to talk with Nan here about the work that we're doing. So last summer, right, we engaged in a workshop and trying to build initial capacity around project-based learning. So let's talk a little bit about that experience and any sort of maybe preconceptions, misconceptions, prior work around what you might have thought you were doing as projects or project-based learning in those 21 years of teaching.
Sure. I have always done projects. I'm a very hands-on teacher. I'm not big with worksheets, although I think they have their place, but I'm not one that typically centers my teaching around worksheets as being the end result. So I've been doing projects for a long time. One of the things that was brought to my attention that I had not really thought of we were doing the training in the summer was it being authentic and being real, a real world problem.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people think that doing science experiments or an activity is a project. And I think I was of that mindset as well. And then when we had the training, it began to click with me, no, they need to see this through to the end. It needs to have some meaning. And so that really was the turning point for me. The training opened that up, as well as the thinking process behind developing the projects. And while on those 3 days, it was daunting. That was a lot to do in 3 days, and to try to work with your group to do a project, we were able to do that. But I think one of the things that we came away with was, while this is our thinking process, you also have to make it your own, and you have to internalize that.
Right. So,
and this is my third or fourth project this year, and with each project, it's gotten easier. I understand where I'm going with it. At the beginning, the hardest part was my driving question.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think that would be the easiest. What do you want them to learn? And it is, when you're thinking about learning targets and standards, but how do I make that authentic and real for them in today's world?
Right.
And so I think for me, getting past the driving question was the big step.
Yeah. So what you're describing is fairly typical. And when I work with teachers and we work with teachers around project-based learning, we certainly see lots of teachers, and I think I probably said this in our workshop as I reflect back in my teaching. I thought I was doing some really great teaching and doing some things where I'm having kids doing projects. One of my favorite examples to joke about is in 2004, I was teaching Honors U.S. History, and I had my students make multimedia history projects where they put together a video with evidence, and then we uploaded it to this new thing nobody had ever heard about called YouTube, and the kids were like, what in the world? YouTube, what is this? They're actually still on there. I found some of them, and they weren't bad. Like you talk about projects as culminating things, and we usually think about it as building that knowledge and understanding, the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy, and then asking kids to go apply it, which is certainly much better than the drill and kill, lecture, traditional worksheets, whatever, test and that kind of stuff. But it's not as powerful as it could be. So the shift that you're describing there is really about the inquiry, and starting at the top of Bloom's taxonomy with let's ask them to create something, and in that process they're reaching down to the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy themselves and identifying the knowledge and the understanding and the things that they have to remember in order to do that. So it shifts that perspective. So the driving question is a really big part of that. And I always try to get teachers, if you recall, I probably said let's really focus on the product, the purpose, and the audience. So what are the students going to create? Why are they making it or creating that, and for whom? And your driving question here on the blog, which we'll link in the show notes, is Spotlight Student Work and Project-Based Learning. The one of the pictures, and you have a couple different projects going on, and one that sort of stemmed off of this, as I understand, something like during the next generation, the problem with world hunger will grow. So how can we develop and implement a plan by 2050 to feed 9 billion people with less land? So easy work for elementary students, right? What did that?
Oh, absolutely.
What did that driving question start out as? Do you recall?
Yes, having this group last year as fourth graders, when we were learning about plants, they were shocked, and it's hard for them to get past the misconception that plants do not have to have soil in order to grow and thrive. And so we started talking a little bit about hydroponics, and we looked into that some, but didn't really take it any further. Well, when we started reviewing about plants this year, they kept bringing that up. And I thought, okay, this is what they're interested in. So then it just sort of started developing, and I thought, okay, how can I make this real? Instead of just saying, okay, here's another way for them to grow, and there it is. So the more we thought about it, my teaching partners and I helped they were instrumental in coming up with this driving question. And we decided to tie it around world hunger. And I started doing some research. And so I thought I had everything together. I presented the question to the students, and we started researching world hunger. And it went in a total opposite direction from where I was going. And I had a student that said, I've been to Kids Against Hunger, and they've moved to Marshall County. And so I said, "You've got to be kidding," because this was part of where I was going with this. Were different organizations that you can be a part of that helps with world hunger, and it stemmed from the kids doing their own research about world hunger, and then we called and took a field trip to kids, and we actually were only able to be there about 40 minutes to make the meals, and they thought we would make maybe 1,000. And the kids were so in tune with what we were doing that they made nearly 5,000 meals in 40 minutes.
Wow.
And one of my students at the end said, "I feel so good about myself because I have done something that no one else in my family has ever done. And it feels so good to help somebody else." And it was coming from this student. It wasn't something that I expected to hear. We came back, and that was the catalyst for the entire project, because every time we would get to a step and we would get to a stumbling point, they would come back to that. The reason we're doing this is because there is world hunger, and we can solve that, and the problem is going to get worse. And it just, like I said, it took a whole different turn than I expected. After that, we went into the different types of agriculture. We talked about sustainable agriculture and organic and traditional agriculture. They were able to compare and contrast those. Then I was just going to do hydroponics. That was what was easy for me. I had done some research on that. And then they decided they wanted to also do aeroponics and aquaponics. So we jumped in with both feet. And the first thing you have to know is I am a horrible plant grower. If I look at it, it dies. I have a brown thumb. It's awful. So I pretended like I knew everything that needed to be known, which the kids figured out very quickly that it wasn't, that I didn't know anything. But that was okay. I was honest with them. I'd say, "I don't know. We need to find out." So we would research. We'd go online and look. We also found out that there is a hydroponics company that has just opened about 20 miles down the road from us. And so they became our advocates. And we would call. I would go down and take pictures of what our plants were doing, and they would tell us what we needed to do differently. And they deal mainly with hydroponics, but they were able to help me some with the aquaponics and the aeroponics. We had lots of plants that died. The kids did problem solving and figured out what they thought they needed to do differently to get the plants to grow, and they made changes. And again, this is me being the facilitator. I never had to come in and say, "Well, this is what's wrong," or "This is what's happened." They've done their own trial and error, and sometimes they've done it several times. And in fact, we did a reflection yesterday, and one of the things, and this came from a PBL site, and it was what was one of the things that was frustrating to you? And that was one of the things they said was trying to find out the one thing that worked. And but it was, I enjoyed reading the parts that they were most satisfied with, what they have learned the most. And some of the children put, I learned that when something's hard, you just have to keep trying. You'll eventually figure it out, but it's going to be worth it. But we actually have viable plants. Our goal is to get to eat a salad. We will have 57 forks in one bowl perhaps, but we do have viable salad makings that we're going to have next week. So it's taking a long time, but we've gotten there.
Yeah. Well, what you're speaking to is several things there, which I just love. The authenticity and the meaningfulness and the purpose. And, one of the big friction points, of course, around doing really great projects can be, and often is, the content standards and the accountability to those things. So, really giving yourself the opportunity to be flexible enough to, really help identify student passions and do things that that can spark those student passions, because they may not have, well, they may have said, oh, world hunger, it may have come up in sort of a general discussion. Exposing them to something as sort of an entry event like you did, that really gets them thinking about this as a real problem to be solved, as opposed to something that's just, oh, I'm doing this because the teacher told me to. And you're an elementary teacher, you still have lots of students, not all, but probably more students than middle or high, that are going to play the game of school and be compliant and be teacher pleasers. But even if that's the case, even if all the kids are teacher pleasers and want to please you and do things for you, we still want to think about how we shift that work towards something that's really pleasing them and interesting to them and meaningful and purposeful to them. And so were you able to, or what were some of the challenges in sort of lining up your work with the project to the content standards that you needed to teach for that grade level?
Well, actually, that I started, and a lot of people question that with project-based learning, like, oh, you're just throwing something out there and it's whatever you want to do or whatever the kids want to do, and there's no content basis behind it. But what I found when I started, after my driving question, I sat down and in my mind, I had an outline of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go with it. So I started looking at my standards. And as I was looking, the standards that I covered in this project not only covered all of my life standards, it covered a good portion of the earth standards as well. Mm-hmm. I covered a multitude of ELA standards, some social studies. Now, the social studies wasn't necessarily a fifth grade standard, but it reached into middle school, as well as with the science standards. It's a middle school standard. And of course, being fifth graders, they thought that was great that they were doing middle school standards. Right. It gave them a little bit of confidence in themselves. Mm-hmm. And they did do an excellent job. In fact, we had, I had a high school teacher that her juniors were doing a similar project. And she said, they're having the hardest time, and, they're wanting to give up, and it's not working the way they want. So she said, would you send me pictures of your projects? And of course, ours were all homemade. The kids researched their own designs. They tweaked what they found. We have some of the most unusual concoctions that we've put together that have worked. And, we didn't have a model that we bought. Uh-huh. So the kids were excited to get to take their pictures and send those to those juniors in high school to show them that it could be done, and it could be done by fifth graders. So that was a confidence boost in them. But as far as covering the standards, it actually was pretty easy, because you are doing so many things and you are being cross-curricular that, and the writing teacher did a big portion of it, especially of our culminating event of doing their public service announcements, that it was enlightening to see, and the kids didn't mind doing that writing, and they enjoyed coming to class every day. When they came in, in fact, I'd have to say, you all have to wait just a minute. We've got to talk before you get started. I'm having to hold them back. Right. And, I can honestly say in 21 years, I've never had to hold a class back from learning and from doing. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's been very refreshing. And I'm going to be honest, it's been very time consuming as far as on the front end. I spent a lot of time planning and putting this together. It's been in stages as we've started a different phase of it. That's where my planning has come in. But once I have done the initial planning, I truly have been the facilitator. Right. I know what we're going from point A to point B, and they are not going to take it in a direct path. It's going to go in many different directions, but that's exactly how they learn. And there's so many times I want to say, just let me show you. Right. And I've had to step out in the hall, and walk away just a little bit to give them some space. They may not do it my way or in my time frame, but they will get there. Right. And if not, they'll ask for some assistance. But usually they ask from somebody else, not from me.
Well, the dynamic is changing, or has changed. That's the shift. That one of the real powerful things about project-based learning that people, when they do it well, really see is that students start asking more questions and better questions. But so that shift is going from I'm the teacher, here's what you need to learn, and hopefully they'll be compliant and they'll do the work, to that shift of the students saying, hey, hey teacher, this is what I need to learn. Can you help me? And you just act as that facilitator, and you're describing it really well, that really just giving them space and letting them struggle. Well, I call it productive struggle. And sometimes they get there, and sometimes you need to step in a little bit. And that's one of those art of teaching things, is when do you step in and when do you let them kind of struggle and flail about a little bit and get a little frustrated, and then see, boy, I need to step in here so that they don't break down and lose their momentum, but you don't want to give them too much, because then you're leading their learning, and we want them to lead their learning. So you were talking about being rejuvenated, and one of the things that I heard you speak about this before and was really touching and I think really powerful. I'd appreciate it if you talk about it a little bit more here, is what you have taught for, you said 21 years, and this shift has made a pretty sizable impact on your practice and your feeling about your practice.
Absolutely. I stated when we were in a meeting together earlier, I hated my job. I love to teach, but I hated my job. I felt like I was just preparing kids to take a test, and it was all about the test. And I knew that I was not preparing them for the future. And as our community has changed, our student body has changed, the population, the makeup, and we had not changed with them. So, and it's easy just to blame it on other factors, but I'm responsible for my classroom. And I knew in my heart that I wasn't meeting their needs. And a few years ago, we started making some changes to that. And we could see a difference in our children. We could see a difference in their outlook on education while they were with us. But still, there was that test coming at the end of the year that you knew that you had to perform for, that they had to do that. So, I think back to all the time that I've wasted preparing for a test.
Right.
And, I didn't like what I was doing. I knew that's what was required of me, though. That was my job. And my passion's teaching, obviously, but my job is a different thing. When we started doing the projects this summer, we were all like, yes, this is what we've been wanting. This is what we want to do. And in the fall, I did one of the projects that we wrote in the summer. And I did another more below scale one with my fifth graders. And I saw a change in the students. I saw a change in myself. I enjoyed what they were doing, how proud the kids were of their work. It was more of an intrinsic reward. We're always giving extrinsic rewards for any time they do something well. But, that's just them. They're waiting for that reward. This was more intrinsic. And I think it was for me as well. I felt good about what I was doing. And then when this last project came up, like I said, it's gone to places that I never dreamed of. And I'm covering all of my content, but the kids are enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. And I know more about my students now than I have ever known about them in the past. I know the kids that can that think critically. I know the kids that collaborate. I've seen how they've changed. They are in groups that they would have never picked for themselves. I did it according to what their interest was. And when they got in their groups, some of them had never worked together before. In fact, we did an activity this week, and I had to tell them, you have to choose someone that's not in your project group. You cannot stay together. I've seen relationships develop. I have students in my class that have behavior disorders. I've seen them become parts of groups. I've seen the other kids welcome them into their groups. It's just, I think I've seen so much growth, not just academically, but socially. And in order for them to be successful in the 21st century, they have to be able to collaborate. They have to be able to communicate.
Right.
And I just can't say enough about the changes I've seen in my students.
Well,
that's what I want.
Yeah, that's really powerful testimony. And it to be clear, PBL is not a silver bullet. It doesn't cure all evils, but it does when you make that shift, and it's scary sometimes, and it can be a lot of work. Like you mentioned, there's a good bit of work, especially on the front end. You do get better at the planning process, and it becomes a little bit more streamlined. But any major shift in practice and sort of a paradigm shift is going to take some major work, but it is worth it. And having done those things and making that shift as a teacher in my practice, I remember that sort of elation that really, wow, this is really getting what we want, instead of things that we know aren't really for the students. They're more for the adults, that accountability and tests and all that stuff. But let's talk a little bit before we leave here. Make sure that because it's not all sunshine and roses. What are the biggest challenges? What are the hardest pieces? And maybe you've already mentioned them about doing this and making this shift. What have been the biggest obstacles?
I think time is a big obstacle. If you have blocks of time, for instance, we switch classes every 50 minutes. Mm-hmm. Time can sometimes be an issue, trying to get it all done in a certain amount of time where you can't have an extra 10, 15, 20 minutes. I think money, I'm not going to lie, this project's been a little expensive. I fortunately have had parents that have donated a lot of things. The school has been very behind this, and they have helped as much as they can. But I think that's something that you have to consider when for administration when you're doing project-based learning. Mm-hmm. The trips to make this authentic, going to Kids Against Hunger, my principal paid for our bus to go because I said I just can't ask the kids for anything else. Mm-hmm. So I mean, money is an issue there as well. I am so fortunate that I have a wonderful support system with my teaching partners, and also with people I teach with outside of the school building, that we collaborate a lot together. They have been an excellent resource for me, and I think that's something that you have to have. You can't do this alone, even if it's just someone to bounce things off of or to reel you in. Somebody to share that load with you. I think that's very important. I think, you've got to have time to plan. And we all know that, and unfortunately, we are in a paperwork mm-hmm. job where there's always something else that needs to be done that is busy work at times. And, I'll be honest, I've pushed some of that back to the last second because I've been doing other things. And I just try to weigh that as my students are coming first. That's going to have to wait a little bit. So that's not always real popular. But it is something I feel like that I made a choice there. And then again, I think having the freedom to do this, you've got to have the support of your administrators, because if you are in a test-driven school or district and that's what it's all about, they're not going to see the validity in this. Whereas I can argue that very easily when I look at the standards, when I look at the assessments I've done. Have I done a multiple choice assessment? No, I haven't. I've done it through their public service announcements. I've done it through reflection. We've done anecdotal records, that kind of thing on students. So it's not, I can't produce to you, here's a test that proves to you that they know this. To me, a test proves that they know it for that minute.
Right.
But you're welcome to have a conversation with my students. And in fact, we did that when they had their showcase, and we invited parents in the community, and I expected maybe 75 people. We had 167 to come, and just the community, their response to the students and the way that they were able to talk to them and have a conversation. And we practiced that. The kids practiced interviewing each other, and it was funny listening to them because they would say, "Oh, you know better than that," or "You need to tell more about that." And my kids do know. They do know what they're talking about. more than a regular test will give. So I think you've got to have that freedom to be different, and to trust your teacher that they're doing what they need to be doing.
Yeah, and I know you've got to get going because you've got kids coming into your classroom here in a few minutes. But you're really speaking to a lot of things that are certainly interesting points. I mean, so funding and time and scheduling, which I think speak in a lot of cases to how we've structured school and how we maybe need to rethink and restructure school. And you also you make a very good point, having the luxury, and you have some really great leadership, Abby Griffey and your superintendent Trent Lovett, being able to really support this work and know that what you are as a professional. And while we might be used to seeing multiple choice tests and scores and reporting those in the paper, that really doesn't show us what we need to know. And what you are doing as a professional is measuring that in ways that a professional teacher does, and that they're doing those things, that they're able to do, and you know much more. So as you've articulated really well, so it's really a powerful piece, and I look forward to hearing more and seeing more and supporting you all more. And the blog piece will be on the show notes, as well as another Marshall County. I don't know if you've seen the other blog piece that I wrote about the third graders doing a pancake project with IHOP, so that was fun as well. Yeah. So I love to see my work taking hold and see some evidence of it. Again, it's very gratifying for me. So any parting shots for folks, advice for teachers thinking about going into and diving in or stepping in or putting toes into PBL?
I think you just have to not be afraid. It's daunting at first, but just jump in with both feet. Yeah. If you mess up, you learn from it just like the kids, and you go on and you do it differently the next time. Right. My third project was a lot different than my first project. Mm-hmm. You learn as you go, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. We want kids learn from the mistakes they make, and so do adults, and just do it.
Well, Nan, thanks so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day and your kiddos as they're coming in and working on projects, and have a great day.
All right. Thank you. You too.
That'll do it for today's podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and if you didn't hate it, please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening, and share it on social media wherever you feel comfortable. Speaking of social media, you can find us in all the normal places like Facebook, Twitter, Google+, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and please share us on those places as well. And don't forget about TeachThought Professional Development. You can find us there at teachthought.com/PD.